The baby's cries cut through the airplane cabin like a knife through silence, sharp and impossible to ignore. Rachel Martinez held her 6-month-old daughter tighter against her chest, whispering desperate apologies to anyone who would listen. 23 years old and already worn down by life, she could feel every judgmental stare like a physical weight pressing on her shoulders. Sophia's wails seemed to echo louder in the cramped economy section, and Rachel fought back her own tears as she bounced the baby gently, uselessly. "Please, sweetheart, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. The young mother had been awake for nearly 36 hours straight, having worked a double shift at the diner before catching this red-eye flight from Los Angeles to Chicago. The ticket had cost her every penny of her savings, but she'd had no choice. Her sister Carmen was getting married in 2 days, and despite their strained relationship, Rachel couldn't miss it. Dark circles shadowed her brown eyes, and her once vibrant smile had been worn thin by months of struggling to make ends meet as a single mother. Her ex-boyfriend had disappeared the moment she'd told him about the pregnancy, leaving her to navigate parenthood alone in a studio apartment that barely qualified as livable. Every day was a battle between paying for diapers or groceries, between keeping the lights on or buying Sophia's formula. The flight attendant approached with barely concealed irritation. "Ma'am, you need to keep your baby quiet. Other passengers are trying to rest." "I'm trying," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. She's usually such a good baby, but she hasn't slept properly in days. The change in routine, the noise. She trailed off, knowing her explanations sounded like excuses. Sophia's cries intensified, and Rachel noticed several passengers pulling out their phones, likely to record her embarrassment. Her face burned with shame as she realized she was becoming one of those stories people would share online, the inconsiderate mother who ruined everyone's flight. "Maybe you should have thought about that before booking a flight," muttered an elderly man across the aisle, loud enough for her to hear. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She had considered driving, but her old Honda had broken down 3 weeks ago, and she couldn't afford the repairs. This flight was her only option, booked with money she should have used for next month's rent. She was already dreading the conversation with her landlord when she returned. Just as she was about to retreat to the airplane bathroom to try calming Sophia in private, a low voice spoke beside her. "Let me try something." Rachel looked up to see a man in a dark navy suit, probably in his mid-30s, with black hair and striking blue eyes that held something both gentle and dangerous. Everything about him suggested wealth and power, from his perfectly tailored clothing to the platinum watch on his wrist. But there was something else too, the way other passengers had shifted when he'd moved down the aisle, the subtle deference in the flight attendant's manner when she'd passed his row. This wasn't just money. This was something deeper. 3 rows behind him, Rachel noticed 2 other men in dark suits watching quietly. They didn't look like typical businessmen. They looked like soldiers waiting for orders. What?" Rachel stammered, confused and slightly intimidated. "Trust me," he said simply. His voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. Rachel hesitated. She had learned to be wary of strangers, especially men who showed sudden interest in her and Sophia. But something about his calm demeanor, the steadiness in those blue eyes, made her desperate enough to try anything. "Okay," she whispered, carefully transferring Sophia into his arms. The moment the baby settled against his shoulder, something almost magical happened. Within seconds, Sophia's cries softened to quiet whimpers, and then to complete silence. The man's large hand moved in gentle circles on her tiny back, and he hummed a soft melody that seemed to work like an ancient lullaby. His movements were practiced, natural, as though he'd done this 1,000 times before. "How did you—" Rachel breathed, amazed by the sudden peace. "Experience," he replied quietly, continuing his soothing motions. "Sometimes babies just need different arms." Around them, the cabin had settled into grateful quiet. Passengers who had been glaring moments before now watched with curiosity and relief. The flight attendant even smiled as she passed by, though Rachel noticed the woman's eyes lingered on the man with something that looked almost like recognition, or perhaps respect tinged with wariness. "What's her name?" the man asked, still holding Sophia with practiced ease. "Sophia," Rachel replied, studying his face. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. And I'm Rachel. I can't thank you enough for this. I was about to have a complete breakdown. Mateo, he said simply, no last name, no elaboration. Just that single word, offered like a gift. As Sophia drifted towards sleep against Mateo's shoulder, Rachel found herself relaxing for the first time in days. She watched how naturally he held her daughter, how his expensive suit jacket was now wrinkled and slightly damp from baby drool, yet he didn't seem to care at all. "You're not sitting in economy, are you?" she asked, suddenly aware that everything about him suggested he belonged in first class, or perhaps on a private jet entirely. Mateo's lips curved slightly. "I travel where I need to be." There was something in his tone that made Rachel wonder if there was more to his story, but she was too grateful and exhausted to press further. Behind them, she noticed one of the men in dark suits had moved closer, maintaining a protective distance. When she glanced at him, he looked away, but not before she caught the shoulder holster beneath his jacket. Who was this man holding her baby? "I should take her back," she said half-heartedly, though Sophia looked more comfortable than she had in days. "She's fine here if you want to rest," Mateo offered, his voice still low and measured. "You look like you could use some sleep." Rachel wanted to protest, to maintain her independence, and not accept help from a stranger, but her body was betraying her. The combination of exhaustion, relief, and the first kindness she'd experienced in months was overwhelming her defenses. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice already thick with impending sleep. "I'm sure." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact, delivered with quiet authority. Despite every instinct telling her to stay alert, Rachel felt her head growing heavy. The warmth radiating from Mateo, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and Sophia's peaceful silence created a cocoon of safety she hadn't felt in months. Almost without realizing it, she found herself leaning against his shoulder, her consciousness fading as the airplane carried them through the night sky. What Rachel didn't know was that Mateo Greco had been watching her struggle for the past hour, his heart breaking at the sight of such a young mother trying so hard to manage alone. It reminded him too much of his own mother, of nights he'd spent as a child watching her cry herself to sleep after working 3 jobs. What Rachel also didn't know was that Mateo wasn't just any passenger. He was the head of Greco Enterprises, a name that carried weight in Chicago's business circles and far darker circles beneath. And this chance encounter was about to change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Rachel stirred awake to the gentle announcement that they would be landing in Chicago in 30 minutes. For a moment, she was disoriented, wondering why she felt so warm and comfortable. Then the reality of her situation crashed back. She was still leaning against Mateo's shoulder, and Sophia was sleeping peacefully in his arms, completely content. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she whispered urgently, sitting up quickly and immediately missing the warmth. "I can't believe I fell asleep on you. You must think I'm completely inappropriate." Mateo's expression didn't change. "You needed sleep, both of you." He carefully transferred the sleeping baby back to Rachel's arms, and she marveled at how different Sophia looked when she wasn't crying from stress and overstimulation. Behind them, the 2 men in dark suits were already gathering their belongings, moving with practiced efficiency. "She's usually not this peaceful," Rachel admitted. "It's just been so hard lately. Everything feels like it's falling apart, and I'm barely keeping my head above water." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and Rachel immediately regretted the overshare. This stranger didn't need to hear about her problems, no matter how kind he had been. "Tell me," Mateo said quietly. It wasn't quite a question, more like an invitation delivered as a gentle command. Rachel hesitated. She had learned to keep her struggles private, partly from pride and partly from the painful experience of people who offered help only to disappear when things got difficult. But something about Mateo's steady gaze made her feel safe. "I'm a single mom," she began quietly. "Sophia's father left when I told him I was pregnant. I work at a diner in LA, pulling double shifts just to afford our tiny apartment. My car broke down, I'm behind on rent, and I used my last savings for this plane ticket because my sister is getting married." She paused, fighting back tears. "The worst part is Carmen and I haven't spoken in 2 years. We had a huge fight when I got pregnant because she thought I was throwing my life away. She only invited me because our mother guilt-tripped her into it before she died. I don't even know why I'm going, except that she's the only family I have left." Mateo listened intently, never interrupting or offering empty platitudes. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. Takes courage, he said finally. Raising a child alone, working hard, trying to fix family. You're stronger than you think. Rachel looked at him skeptically. You don't know me. For all you know, I could have made terrible choices that led to this situation. Maybe. Mateo acknowledged this with a slight nod. But I've been watching you since takeoff. The way you apologize to everyone. How gentle you are with her, even when you're exhausted. Going to a wedding where you might not be welcome because it's familia. The Italian word rolled off his tongue naturally. Those aren't the actions of someone who makes terrible choices. His words hit Rachel harder than she expected. When was the last time someone had said something genuinely kind about her character? What about you? She asked, deflecting attention. You never told me what you do for work, and you still haven't explained why someone who can obviously afford first class is sitting back here with the rest of us. Mateo's expression grew thoughtful, and Rachel sensed there was something he wasn't telling her. I run a business, import, construction, and sometimes I prefer economy because you meet real people back here. First class makes you forget what matters. That's a very diplomatic non-answer, Rachel observed, studying his face. Behind him, one of the dark-suited men was speaking quietly into his phone, his eyes never leaving Mateo. Are you some kind of mystery man? Should I be worried that I fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder? Nothing to worry about, Mateo said, but Rachel noticed he still hadn't given her a straight answer. I'm in a position where I help people when I can. Sometimes it's easier without complications. Before Rachel could press further, the plane began its descent. The captain's voice filled the cabin with landing instructions, breaking the spell of their intimate conversation. Passengers around them began gathering belongings and preparing for arrival. This is probably where we say goodbye, Rachel said, feeling unexpectedly sad about parting ways with this enigmatic stranger who had shown her more compassion in a few hours than she'd experienced in months. I can't thank you enough for what you did. You saved me from complete humiliation. Actually, Mateo said, reaching into his jacket pocket, I was hoping to give you something. He pulled out an elegant business card, cream-colored with simple black lettering. The card was thick, expensive, with raised text that read, Mateo Greco, Greco Erco Enterprises. Below that was a phone number and an address in downtown Chicago. If you need anything, he said, his voice low and serious, call this number. Rachel took the card, staring at the name. Even she, working in a small diner and struggling to make ends meet, had heard whispers about Greco Enterprises. They owned half the waterfront. They controlled construction, contracts, and, according to rumors, operated in shadows as much as in light. But they were also known for something else, a program that helped single mothers find housing and stability. You're Mateo Greco, she whispered, her eyes widening. Yes. I've heard stories about you, Rachel said carefully, about your family, about what you do. I imagine you have. Mateo's expression was unreadable. Believe what you want, but the number on that card is real. Use it if you need it. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, and passengers immediately began standing, despite the flight attendant's request to remain seated. Rachel clutched the business card, unsure whether this revelation made everything better or more complicated. As they taxied toward the gate, she stared at the card in her hands, wondering if this chance encounter was about to change her life forever, or if she was about to wake up from an impossible dream. The Chicago airport buzzed with typical morning chaos as Rachel gathered her meager belongings from the overhead compartment. Her single duffel bag, containing everything she owned for the weekend, felt pathetically small compared to the sleek luggage other passengers were retrieving. Mateo waited patiently beside her, Sophia still sleeping peacefully in his arms. Let me help you with that, he offered as she struggled with the bag's broken zipper. I've got it, Rachel insisted, finally wrestling the bag free. The gesture was automatic. She had learned to be fiercely independent out of necessity. As they walked through the jet bridge together, Rachel became increasingly aware of the contrast between them. Mateo moved with quiet confidence, and she noticed how other passengers gave him space, how security personnel nodded respectfully as he passed. The two men in dark suits followed at a discreet distance, and Rachel realized they were his protection, or perhaps his enforcers. Where are you staying for the wedding? Mateo asked as they entered the terminal. A motel near the venue, Rachel replied, not mentioning that she'd chosen the cheapest option she could find online, with reviews that mentioned stained carpets and questionable cleanliness. It's not fancy, but Sophia and I don't need much. Mateo frowned slightly. Chicago in October gets cold. Some of those places don't have proper heating. I can't afford anything better. Rachel cut him off, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Look, I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't need you to solve all my problems. I've been managing on my own just fine. The words came out harsher than she intended, born from years of struggling to maintain dignity while barely surviving. Mateo raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, clearly recognizing he had overstepped. You're right, I apologize. They reached the baggage claim area, and Mateo's phone began buzzing insistently. He glanced at it with obvious reluctance. I need to take this, he said quietly. Business that can't wait. He answered with a crisp Greco, and Rachel watched his entire demeanor shift into something harder, more dangerous. This was the man people whispered about in careful tones. While Mateo handled his call, Rachel found herself studying him with new eyes. She'd spent the flight talking to Mateo the man, but now she was seeing Mateo Greco, the businessman, the power broker, the figure who operated in Chicago's shadows. I understand the timeline, Mateo was saying into his phone, his voice low but firm, but we don't cut corners on the housing program. These are single mothers, not numbers on a spreadsheet. He paused, listening. No, I review every rejection personally. If someone's in real need and we turn them away because of bureaucracy, we're failing. That's not what my mother would have wanted. Rachel's breath caught. Housing program for single mothers. She strained to hear more without appearing to eavesdrop. Set up the meetings for tomorrow, Mateo continued, and find out why the Santos building still doesn't have working heat. Those families deserve better. A terrible realization began dawning on Rachel. This morning, she had shared her most intimate struggles with a stranger on a plane, her financial problems, her housing insecurity, her status as a single mother barely making ends meet. Now she was learning that this same stranger ran programs specifically designed to help people in her exact situation. When Mateo finished his call, he turned back to her with an expression that might have been apologetic. But Rachel was studying his face with growing suspicion. That housing program you were just discussing, she said slowly, how long has Greco Enterprises been running it? About 3 years, Mateo replied. We've helped over 500 families. And the application process? Rachel pressed, her voice tight. How do people usually find out about it? Something in her tone made Mateo's expression grow cautious. We have people who identify families in need, sometimes through social services, sometimes community organizations. Wait, damn, Rachel felt cold anger building in her chest. How convenient that you happen to be sitting in economy class right next to a single mother who fits your program's demographic perfectly. How convenient that you were so interested in hearing all about my financial struggles and housing problems. Rachel, Mateo began, but she cut him off. I'm suggesting that this whole thing, your kindness, your help with Sophia, this entire conversation, was some kind of setup. Were you already planning to offer me a spot in your housing program? Is this how Greco Enterprises finds its success stories? By targeting vulnerable women on airplanes? It's not like that, Mateo said, his voice remaining calm even as Rachel's rose. Oh my God, I'm so stupid, Rachel continued, her voice rising despite Sophia stirring in her arms. I actually thought someone was being kind to me for no reason. I thought I'd met someone who cared about me as a person, not as a charity case. Other passengers were beginning to stare, but Rachel was too hurt and angry to care. Behind Mateo, his two companions had moved closer, their faces impassive but alert. You want to know the worst part? Rachel said, tears of humiliation burning her eyes. For a few hours, I actually felt like I was worth something. Like maybe I wasn't just some pathetic single mom who couldn't get her life together. But this whole time, you were just evaluating me like some kind of case study. That's not true, Mateo said. And for the first time, something broke through his controlled exterior. Genuine emotion. raw and unguarded. Yes, I travel to oversee our programs. And yes, I sometimes take economy flights to stay connected with the people we serve. But helping you wasn't calculated, Rachel. It was human. I don't believe you, Rachel replied, though something in his voice made her want to. People like you don't just randomly help people like me unless there's something in it for them. Mateo was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. My mother was like you. Single parent, worked three, barely kept us fed and housed. Maria Santos came from Greece with nothing, and my father left when I was 7. He paused, and Rachel saw something vulnerable flash across his face. Every woman we help reminds me of her, of the nights she cried thinking she'd failed me, of the times she went hungry so I could eat, of the way she held her head high even when the world treated her like she was less because she was raising a child alone. This revelation stopped Rachel's angry tirade cold. She studied Mateo's face, seeing something raw and real that hadn't been there before. Every woman we help through our programs, Mateo continued, is my way of honoring her memory. But you, Rachel, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. You weren't a case study. You were someone who needed help, and I was in a position to offer it. That's all. Rachel felt her anger wavering, but the hurt was still too fresh. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you weren't honest with me. You let me pour my heart out while knowing you could fix all my problems with a phone call. And if I had told you who I was from the beginning, Mateo challenged quietly, would you have talked to me the same way? Would you have let me hold Sophia, or would you have assumed I had ulterior motives? Rachel opened her mouth to argue, then realized he was right. If she had known he was Mateo Greco, the powerful businessman with charitable programs, she would have been either suspicious of his intentions or too intimidated to be herself. But before she could respond, Sophia began crying again, the stress and raised voices disturbing her peaceful sleep. The sound cut through Rachel's emotional turmoil, reminding her that she had more immediate concerns than sorting out her complicated feelings about this mysterious man. I have to go, she said, adjusting Sophia in her arms. My sister is expecting me, and I've already made enough of a scene in public for one day. Rachel, please, Mateo called as she started walking away. Behind him, his companions watched but didn't move. Let me explain everything properly. But Rachel kept walking, her heart breaking with every step, wondering if she had just walked away from the answer to all her prayers, or if she had narrowly escaped becoming someone's charity project. The motel room was every bit as depressing as Rachel had expected. The carpet bore mysterious stains, the heater rattled ominously, and the thin walls meant she could hear every conversation in adjacent rooms. But none of that mattered as much as the ache in her chest from walking away from Mateo at the airport 2 days ago. Rachel sat on the lumpy bed trying to fix a run in her only nice dress, a simple navy blue piece she'd worn to job interviews and her mother's funeral. Sophia lay on the bed beside her, finally content after a difficult night in the unfamiliar environment. Tomorrow was Carmen's wedding, and Rachel still hadn't decided if she actually had the courage to show up. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Rehearsal dinner is at 7. You're still coming to the wedding tomorrow, right? The message was polite but distant, carrying none of the warmth Rachel remembered from their childhood. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on, yes, I'll be there. What she didn't tell Carmen was that she'd spent the last 2 days replaying every moment of her conversation with Mateo, wondering if she had been completely wrong about his intentions. The hurt was still there, but so was a growing regret that she might have thrown away something genuine because of her own defensive walls. A knock at the door interrupted her brooding. Rachel peered through the peephole, expecting to see the motel manager or perhaps a pizza delivery for the wrong room. Instead, she saw Carmen standing in the hallway, looking elegant in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. Carmen? Rachel opened the door, shocked. What are you doing here? Her sister stepped inside, surveying the shabby room with barely concealed dismay. I came to talk to you before tomorrow. We need to clear the air. Rachel bristled automatically. If you're here to tell me I don't belong at your wedding, just save us both the time. Actually, Carmen said, sitting carefully on the room's single chair, I'm here to apologize. And to tell you something that might change how you feel about a lot of things. This wasn't the conversation Rachel had been expecting. Carmen had always been the successful sister, the one who went to college, got the good job, married the right man. She had never apologized for anything, especially not to Rachel. 2 years ago, when we had that fight about your pregnancy, Carmen began, her voice tight with emotion, I said terrible things. I called you irresponsible, said you were throwing your life away, accused you of being selfish for having a baby you couldn't afford. I remember, Rachel said quietly, the old wound still tender. What you don't know is that I was pregnant too, Carmen continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael and I had been trying for months. When I found out you were having Sophia, I was so angry because it felt like you got something I wanted desperately, and you didn't even plan for it. Rachel stared at her sister, processing this revelation. Carmen, I had no idea I lost the baby 2 weeks after our fight, Carmen interrupted, tears flowing freely now. And instead of calling you, instead of apologizing and asking for support, I buried myself in work, in wedding planning, and pretended everything was fine. I've spent 2 years being angry at you for having what I couldn't keep. The sisters sat in silence for a moment, both crying for different reasons. Rachel reached for Carmen's hand, and for the first time in years, her sister didn't pull away. I'm so sorry, Rachel whispered. I wish I had known. I wish I could have been there for you. That's not even the most important thing I came to tell you, Carmen said, wiping her eyes. Yesterday, a man came to my office. He said he was trying to reach you about something urgent, but you weren't answering your phone. Rachel's heart stopped. Matteo? Matteo Greco? Yes. Carmen leaned forward. He explained that you two had met on a flight and that there had been some kind of misunderstanding. He asked if I knew how to reach you, and when I told him I was your sister, he asked if we could meet. You met with him? Rachel asked. Alarmed? I did. And Rachel, you need to know what he told me. Carmen's expression was earnest, almost pleading. He said he's been looking for you for 2 days, not because of any housing program or charity initiative, but because he's falling in love with you. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. That's impossible. We knew each other for a few hours. That's what I told him, Carmen replied. But then he spent 20 minutes telling me about every detail of your conversation on that plane, about how Sophia fell asleep in his arms, about how brave and strong you are, about how you made him remember why he started his charitable work in the first place, to honor his mother, who raised him alone after his father abandoned them. Carmen pulled out her phone and opened a news article. He asked me to show you this. Rachel read the headline. Greco Enterprises establishes single mother housing initiative in memory of Maria Santos Greco. Below was a photo from 3 years ago, Matteo at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing beside a modest apartment building. His expression in the photo was different from the controlled mask she'd seen at the airport. In this picture, he looked younger, more vulnerable, and deeply sad. Read the quote, Carmen instructed. Rachel read aloud. My mother, Maria Santos, came to this country with nothing and raised me alone after my father left when I was 7. She worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed, often going hungry herself so I could eat. This program exists because no child should wonder if they'll have a home tomorrow, and no mother should have to choose between feeding her child and paying rent. This is for her and for every mother who fights every day to give her children a better life. Santos was his mother's maiden name, Carmen explained. She was a single mother from Greece who cleaned offices at night and worked in factories during the day. Matteo grew up in poverty, Rachel. He understands your world because he lived it. Rachel sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by this new information. Everything she thought she knew about Matteo was shifting, revealing a picture of someone who truly understood struggle and chose to help others because of it, not despite it. There's more, Carmen said gently. He's here in Chicago. He's been staying at the hotel where my reception is tomorrow night. Not because he's trying to intrude, but because he's hoping you'll give him a chance to explain everything properly. He's at your wedding venue? Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. I invited him, Carmen admitted. After hearing his story, after seeing how desperate he was to find you and make things right, I thought maybe this was fate. Maybe you two were supposed to meet, and maybe I was supposed to help fix what got broken. Rachel looked down at Sophia, who was watching her with bright, curious eyes. Her daughter deserved stability, safety, maybe even a father figure who would love and protect her. And Rachel deserved someone who saw her as more than just a struggling, single mother. Someone who saw her strength, her courage, her worth. "What if I'm not brave enough?" Rachel whispered. "What if I'm too scared of getting hurt?" "Then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering, what if," Carmen replied. "And Rachel, you're the bravest person I know. You've survived everything life has thrown at you, and you've raised a beautiful daughter while doing it. If you can do all that, you can certainly take a chance on love." The next evening, Rachel stood outside the elegant hotel ballroom where Carmen's reception was in full swing. She had borrowed a dress from her sister, a beautiful emerald green gown that made her feel like someone who belonged in such a fancy place. Sophia was upstairs with a hotel babysitter, sleeping peacefully for once. Through the glass doors, Rachel could see the celebration inside. Carmen looked radiant in her wedding dress, dancing with her new husband, while guests mingled around elegant tables decorated with white roses and gold accents. And there, at a table near the back, sat Matteo in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, watching the door as if he'd been waiting for her all evening. Their eyes met through the glass, and Rachel saw something in his expression that took her breath away. It wasn't pity or charity or even simple attraction. It was hope. Raw, honest, vulnerable hope that made her feel seen and valued for exactly who she was. Matteo rose from his chair and walked toward the door, never breaking eye contact. When he reached her, he stopped just close enough that she could see the emotion in his blue eyes, hope and fear warring together. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," he said softly. "I was afraid too," Rachel admitted. "But someone recently told me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are terrified." "I should have been honest with you from the beginning," Matteo said, his voice low and intense. "Not about who I am professionally, but about how I felt. The moment Sophia fell asleep in my arms, and you trusted me enough to rest your head on my shoulder, I knew something had changed. I knew I wanted more than just those few hours." "Matteo," Rachel began, but he held up a gentle hand. "Let me finish, please." He took a breath, and she saw his careful control slip for the first time. "I don't want to help you because, you see, you're a charity case. I want to build something with you because you're the strongest, most genuine person I've met. I want to be Sophia's father, not because she needs one, but because I already love her. And I want to wake up every morning knowing I get to spend another day with the woman who reminded me what really matters." His words were simple, direct, stripped of any pretense or manipulation. This was Matteo Greco, not as the powerful businessman or the charitable benefactor, but as a man who'd grown up poor and alone and recognized something precious when he found it. Rachel felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were tears of joy instead of despair. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling for you the moment you took Sophia in your arms and made her feel safe. But I was so scared of being hurt again, of being disappointed again, that I almost threw it all away." Matteo stepped closer, gently cupping her face in his hands. His touch was warm, careful, reverent. "You never have to be scared of that with me. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you and Sophia are the most important things in my world." As he leaned down to kiss her, Rachel realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness: a crying baby, a stranger's helping hand, and the courage to trust again. Those small moments had led her to something she had never dared to dream of, a love that would change not just her circumstances, but her entire world. When they finally broke apart, Matteo smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Would you like to dance? This is where our real story begins." Rachel took his hand, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Not as a charity case and her benefactor, but as two people who had found in each other the missing pieces of their hearts. Two people who understood what it meant to struggle, to survive, and finally to find home. As they walked into the ballroom together, she glanced back through the glass doors at the Chicago skyline spreading out beneath the night sky. Somewhere up there, in a hotel room filled with soft lamplight, Sophia slept peacefully. dreaming perhaps of the loving family that awaited her when she woke. A family built not on wealth or power, but on understanding, respect, and a love that had been forged in the most unexpected of places, 30,000 feet above the ground, in a moment of crisis that had somehow become the beginning of everything. And as Mateo pulled her close on the dance floor, his arms strong and sure around her, Rachel finally understood what Carmen had meant. Sometimes fate works in mysterious ways, bringing together two people who needed each other more than they knew. A woman fighting to give her daughter a better life, and a man who'd never forgotten where he came from, or the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise him. Their story was just beginning, but Rachel knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it as familia. And in Mateo's world, in the world he'd built to honor his mother's memory, familia meant everything.